Hello and welcome to our webinar this beautiful day. We're excited that you're here. Once again, if you're joining us now, you have right there on our slide the link to the self-assessment, the passion self-assessment. If you haven't had a chance to take that assessment, we will be discussing the results in this webinar. And so to get the most out of your experience, we encourage you to go take that right now while I'm giving some introductions and getting started. So it's 2025, and we're looking forward to another year of building better leaders for your organizations. On our webinar today, it's going to be led by Jack Zenger. He is a world-renowned expert in the field of leadership development. He's a best-selling author, highly respected and sought-after speaker, and he loves leadership a whole lot more than retirement. For those of you who know him. So Joe Folkman is also going to lead the webinar. He's globally recognized as a top leader in the field of psychometrics, leadership and change. He's consultant to some of the world's most successful organizations, and nothing gets him up in the morning like some good old behavioral statistics. Isn't that true, Joe? He's nodding. So Bonnie is our senior client executive. She will be monitoring the chat today. So send over your questions as we're sharing all this different research. We might get back to you today, or we might ask for your email to respond to your question at a later time, but we will get to it. So now, before we get into all this passion data, I wanted to, while people are still finishing up their survey on self-assessment, tell you a little bit about Zenger Folkman for those who are new here. We are pioneers in leadership development. Jack Zenger and Joe Folkman bring decades of experience to the table, but what sets us apart in this crowded field of providers is our laser focus specifically on leadership development and coaching. We're not just another HR consulting firm. We're research obsessed. That's why you find our research published weekly in places like Forbes or Harvard Business Review, Business Insider, and other leading publications. Leadership isn't static, and neither are we. So here's what makes it different in our approach at Zenger Folkman. We are all about strengths. We've been in this industry a long time, long enough to know what doesn't work because we tried it, and then we measured the performance and found out it doesn't work. But the data kept showing us something fascinating. When leaders focused on their strengths instead of fixating on fixing all these weaknesses, something remarkable happens. Suddenly, development isn't scary anymore. It's not this unpleasant chore that they have to get around to. Leaders become energized and passionate about their growth, and it's extraordinary. That's the word we like to use over and over again. So here is our agenda for today and what you can expect from today's webinar. I always like to know, what am I getting into? How long is this going to take? And what am I going to learn? So we're going to start by exploring the research on the impact of passion and leadership development. We're going to transition into how passion interacts with development goals and share Zenger Folkman's CPO model. We'll then review your self-assessment data on passion and get some research that we know you're going to love. Lots of great graphs Joe has made based off of this research that will apply to the leaders in your organization and yourself. So we're going to close with a survey at the end with a very enticing prize for one lucky individual. So stay on till the end. And now I'm going to turn the time over to Jack and Joe. Thank you.
Thanks, Bree. We believe that the passion-driven path begins with a process of self-discovery. Discovering really what energizes you, what you enjoy doing, and especially what brings you great fulfillment. It is based on this core belief that people can achieve the greatest excellence in their careers when they align their interests and their enthusiasm. So, Joe, take it away.
So early on in our training experiences, we've often had an exercise with our participants called the Extraordinary Moments exercise. And the instructions are, think about a time in your life when you loved your job and you were making some headway and you were really doing something exceptional or extraordinary. And that's the Extraordinary Moments exercise. And describe that experience to somebody else. And we used to try to do this exercise pretty quickly, but every time people describe this experience, they go on and they sit on the edge of their seat and they're just excited about it and they really want to talk a lot. And it was hard to get them to do that in just a few minutes. But at the end of having people describe the experience, we'd always say, so what were the common themes, or what were the elements that came out of that? And this is our CPO model. People, if they're doing something extraordinary, they must be skilled at it. The second thing is they ought to be doing something the organization needs. And the third element was, gee, they really loved it. There was a lot of energy and a lot of passion about it. So we're going to describe this model and kind of show you what happens when the three elements aren't always connected. Jack?
Yeah, so when two of the elements are connected, particularly the elements of organizational need and passion, but the person involved is not necessarily highly competent, we've kind of labeled that kind of a novice situation. So again, the overlap is on passion and organizational need, but competence is kind of left out.
Jack, for me, when the pandemic hit, and before the pandemic, most of the time I would be in person delivering training and speeches and things like that. And when the pandemic hit, we were doing it all online. Now, and you might think, well, that's not that hard. That was really hard I was a novice, and every time I did, I go, oh no, the system's going to melt down and things aren't going to come together. That was that experience for me. Another misalignment here is when you're competent at something, you're really passionate about it, but it's not something the organization needs, and that is called a hobby. and oftentimes, the example of that for some people is someone who gets very excited about doing something with PowerPoint, like in motion PowerPoints or something like that. I mean, it's really cool. It takes a lot of time, but nobody cares about it. So anyway, that's a hobby. And
yeah, and a third misalignment that we see happen is when people who are competent are doing things that the organization really needs them to do, but for which there's very little passion. And for me personally, these are things like completing my expense reports. Yeah, I do it pretty well. Obviously, the organization, for all kinds of reasons, needs to have it done, but it's something for which I have zero passion. Creating annual budgets and some of these things, we can all think of things that are for us a chore.
yeah, and then so the objective here is if we can get these three elements in alignment, then we have a leadership sweet spot. We're pretty good at something. It's what the organization needs us to do. And we have that energy and passion. And today we're going to drill in on this passion piece and kind of show you the research we've collected over the last 3 years where we've measured passion preferences for 4,000 leaders. And we're going to talk about that. But Jack.
Yeah, so one of the things that we'd like to kind of share with you is a deeper dive into the definition of passion. The word passion has a lot of emotional kind of connotations to it. And there's been one interesting kind of distinction, and that is comparing what some would call hedonia with eudaimonia. Hedonia comes from the same root that hedonism comes from. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, do things that are enjoyable, that feel good. It's all about doing things that give you pleasure. On the other hand, there are also some things that create passion that come from your belief that they're purposeful, that they're basically just good things to do, that they benefit other people, that they are contributing to society, that it enables you to make a dent in the world in a positive way. That years ago, I did a bunch of interviews with people in a couple of 3 organizations, finding out, what is it that drives you? And it really all boiled down to people saying, hey, I want to make a difference. And so there are indeed 2 sources of this quality that we call passion. Yeah, it is things that we enjoy, but it's also things that give us fulfillment. Now, is one of those better than the other? Do we need to have both? I think you could make the argument that doing things that are simply pleasurable, if they don't have any purpose, in the long term can be very just empty and dry and unfulfilling. On the other hand, if you're just doing things that you believe are socially worthwhile, but that they're not really much fun and they're not enjoyable, that can be kind of tiring and dry. The only scholarly study that we've found on this interesting question was with a group of 1,357 people who, after analysis, it became clear that the hedonia seekers, the people that were only doing it for pleasure, really ultimately had far less enjoyment in their work. And they ended up changing their jobs much more often than those who were seekers for meaning in their work. So we invite you to kind of think about that as just a way of thinking about your own passions. Now, we do believe that there is a time and there's a circumstance where you need to put your passion question aside and do something because it needs to be done. And that is when you have one of your leadership behaviors, one of your leadership competencies on which you receive a very low score. It happens to be on something that is important to the organization. And it may be something for which you don't have a great deal of passion. But we are submitting to you that if it's something that really gets in your way, if it's a barnacle on the hull of your ship, that regardless of your passion, you need to step in and do something about that. And those of you who have gone through some assessment process and you've gotten some feedback on a behavior that is noticeable to others, important to the organization, we strongly say, hey, work on that first. Take care of that. Because until you do, it's going to always drag down the way you are perceived in your organization.
That's really true, Jack. And sometimes the passion there is just not be so terrible, right? It's like I am awful at this and I better change it. So what's our assumptions about passion and performance? The thing that we find is the greater the willingness to invest more time and energy in a competency when passion is high, that people are willing to kind of put more effort into it and try harder. If you love something, it really is important. And so as part of that CPO model, we've tried to sort of say, we're going to measure your effectiveness, competence. We're going to measure your the need for this competency the organization need, but we also want to measure your passion. And if you can kind of have that sweet spot, the greater the tendency to utilize a skill where passion is high. So now, in our self-assessment, what we tried to do was give you all of the 19 competencies that we measure. and let you to kind of do an assessment of kind of which competencies you had the most passion for, and which would be a 5 score, and those that are moderate, some that low, and you know, kind of if you have no passion at all. And so your feedback report really wasn't very surprising. It just basically gave you your scores on these different 19 competencies. Now, we thought that would be helpful for you to enter this discussion where we're going to show you our data that we've collected from about 4,000 leaders about what they're passionate about. Now, let me show you kind of your results. This is a study that I did yesterday. I had only about 50 people in it. So it's a smaller sample than we have kind of from the total data. And these are the early birds that filled out the survey in advance. But you can see there the 19 competencies rank ordered by the average rating, okay? And in the case of the self-assessment, we ask you to rate whether this was your passion was super high or moderate or low. And we did it differently when we collected data from the 4,000 people. Now, the scores in parentheses, you can see builds relationships was your number 1. It was number 3 for our sample of 4,000 people in the norms, okay? And displays high integrity was your number 2, but it was number 4. Innovates was interesting because it was your number 3, third highest, but was actually rated 14th. So that was a real kind of difference. You can see innovation was quite high for you and 12th in the data. Let me drive you down to number 16 for you, which is drive for results. That's interesting because it was number 5 in the normative data. So that was one that was really different. But you can see values diversity, stretch goals, and takes risks. Those were very close. You know, they 17, 19, and 18. Those were the bottom 3 in our other data. Now, when we ask people to indicate their passion on our extraordinary leader assessment, basically we just asked them to choose the 6 competencies that they felt most passionate about. They didn't give a rating on it or anything like that. So yours is a little richer than the data we gathered there, but we're going to show you the results from that in just a minute. One of the things that we did when we looked at the passion on the 4,000 leaders is we looked at the 6 competencies they said that they were passionate about, each individual. And then we looked at the ratings from managers, peers, direct reports, and others. So this is the 360 data. And what you see here is the fact that the competencies that a person was passionate about, the ratings on those was at the 54th percentile. And if you didn't have passion you didn't say a competency you were passionate about, it was only at the 49th percentile. So there does seem to be a significant impact of effectiveness that, you know, that basically what we're saying here is if you're passionate about a particular competency, you tend to be scored higher on it from ratings of other people, okay? So here was the ranking, and this is the percentage people that selected that competency as one of the 6 that they chose. And you can see that solve problems and analyzes issues was selected most often. Second most often was collaboration and teamwork, and then builds relationships, displays integrity, drives for results, develops others, inspires others. And you can see at the bottom, values diversity, takes risks, and stretch goals. They were only selected 14, 10, and 7% of the time. So that's our order in terms of the preference people gave to the selecting a competency. Now, we wanted to look at each of the competencies, and we wanted to understand if that held true, that a particular competency that was selected as being passionate was rated higher. And you can see the score on develops others, 46th percentile for those who didn't select it, but the 57th percentile on those that did. And so there's some interesting things, people who selected that as a competency, they tended to score much better on it than those who didn't select it as a competency. And these are ratings from managers, peers, direct reports, and others. Now, as you go down the T values there, you'll notice that they're all statistically significant right down to solves problems and analyzes issues. And then the last two, learning agility and stretch goals, there wasn't a significant difference in the ratings of others on those two competencies. And so those are, kind of what we refer to as our chore competencies. What's interesting about it is that learning agility and stretch goals, people don't love stretch goals. When your manager comes back and says, we're going to double our production, nobody goes, oh boy. People kind of resist that a little bit. And so one of the things that I wanted to show you was the power of these competencies. So what's interesting here is that you'll notice that stretch goals are critical and they are really important. And as you look at learning agility, one of the things that happens is that when people are younger in their career, 25, 26 to 30, they tend to ask or want feedback. They tend to be more flexible and willing to kind of ask for feedback. But you can see as they age, the learning agility declines. That is a significant decline. And I was talking to someone yesterday and I said, what do you expect would happen if we looked at your ability to kind of learn new things and continue to improve? Did you learn new things last year? And this person said, yeah, I learned a lot of new things. I think I'd get better every year. Well, it doesn't happen. We decline in our effectiveness and especially our learning agility over time. And so that's a dangerous thing. And so it is a critical competency for people. And that's a study of 70,000 people. And then stretch goals, what we're showing you here is your effectiveness on setting stretch goals and overall leadership effectiveness. And what you see here is that people who are really good at setting stretch goals are really perceived as much more effective leaders. Top 25%, at the 75th percentile in overall leadership effectiveness, and those in the top 10% are at the 93rd percentile. So competence in these two competencies, even though they are kind of chore competencies, it really does have a positive impact on an individual. Jack?
Next, we'd like to share with you some data about the impact of a person's age on the passions that they select. And I'm going to ask you to do something that's a little bit counterintuitive, and that is, let's begin at the bottom of the chart and then kind of work our way up rather than the more traditional start at the top and work our way down. There have been lots of different approaches to kind of thinking about how people live their lives and what are the stages that people go through in the course of their careers. One of those is kind of to say that in the early part of your life, you're learning. And as you look at this chart, it's indeed true that the younger people tended to select learning, taking initiative. The next stage of life has been often described as an earning stage of life, that it's the time when people begin to begin their careers, they get positions in organizations. This involves learning how to solve problems, learning how to build relationships, and then learning how to kind of drive for results and accomplish things. Then as people kind of reach the middle part of their life and beyond, they begin thinking about building a sense of community and strengthening the relationships, becoming less concerned about what they own and possessions that they have, and thinking more about the spiritual dimensions of life and the meaning part of life. And they realize that they're now in a position to kind of give to others. And so being inspiring, being concerned about the customer, displaying their honesty and integrity seems to become ever more important. And what kind of legacy will I leave? So it seems to be true that in terms of what topics people focus their passions on as they go through life tend to evolve to some degree. And so you can see here how our data kind of confirms that evolution of what passions you select to work on and to be important to you.
Jack, that was brilliant. I love the way you described that. The second thing looks at gender, the differences between male and female. And what is fascinating here is that as you look at the female competencies that they believe or they're more passionate about, these are all competencies that they tend to be rated better on than males. So collaboration and teamwork and building relationships and inspiring, taking initiative, actually that is the number one highest scoring for females versus males. And then valuing diversity. These are all, kind of competencies where they score higher than males. If you look at the male competencies now, and these tend to be interpersonal, a little more interpersonal, a little more people skills on here, except for taking initiative, which is in the results focus. But the males, they tend to be more passionate about solving problems, driving for results, making decisions, strategic perspective, technical expertise, innovates, and takes risks. And by the way, strategic perspective and technical acumen are two competencies that males score higher on than females. So it's interesting that they connect that way too. But these are their preferences, and their preferences are slightly different. And that's interesting to kind of look at that. What's this last set, Jack?
Yeah, the last set is the influence of people's position in the organization on what passions they select to focus on. And, again, starting at the top up here, the more senior executives, as you look at those drives for results, inspires other people, develops strategic perspective, it's clear that they are trying, the senior people have a greater concern about achieving balance, keeping all the plates spinning, so to speak. That as you move down toward the middle management, they are focused much more on solving immediate problems, keeping the organization functioning smoothly. And then as you move down lower in the organization, you see again that their concern is about probably a smaller sphere, and they're looking at things about how do you learn, how do you acquire technical acumen, how do you build relationships in the organization. So I noticed that one of the comments in the chat room was that these certainly don't apply to everyone, and that's absolutely true. These are generalizations that we can make about the overall group, but not certainly going to be specific to everyone in that population. But we do think it's interesting to see how things are vary by age, vary by gender, vary by position in the organization. And so it maybe helps you to think about, what do I need to kind of begin to put more attention to, based on, where I am in the organization, my stage in my career. Joe?
Well, this is an interesting discussion here on the passion performance connection. And so when I was in grade school, I went to my mom and I really wanted to learn to play the guitar because, people that played the guitar had girlfriends and I didn't have a girlfriend. But anyway, so I went to my mom and I said, Mom, will you buy me a guitar and give me lessons? And she said, we don't own a guitar, but we own a piano. And if you take piano lessons with your brothers, I'll buy a guitar if you learn to play the piano. And so I anyway, she signed myself and my brothers up for piano lessons. My brothers beat me up pretty bad. And then we went to Mrs. South every week and we were terrible. Finally, Mrs. South came to my mom and said, please quit. I didn't have any passion. And so, as you think about that, increased practice time. If you're passionate about something, you're willing to practice it. I was not willing to play the piano. I didn't want to. And so, we avoided the practice, and better quality practice for those who have passion, and the resilience, that willingness to push hard and push through and do more. So passion increases all of those a lot. And then this flow state, as you think about, those things that you lose track of time, that, things just happen. When you're doing those things you're passionate about, you can do them for a long time. You can really engage in them and you lose track of time. And that's that flow state. And so, it really does make sense that as you think about leadership development and about what you can be good at, and again, we discovered that the big insight early on, Jack, is you don't need to be perfect. You
Right.
don't need to be great at, people with three skills, three strengths were at the 81st percentile. And so, if you think about what I could be great at, you just have to have some passion in order to be really great at some competencies.
So Joe talked a little bit about the importance of passion as you get started in something. And certainly it is true that having an interest or enthusiasm really helps as you begin to learn to play the piano or ultimately the guitar. What we've also found, though, is that where this enthusiasm and where this high level of interest has its biggest impact is helping people kind of sustain their efforts in acquiring a new skill, or in working on developing a capability that's really important to the organization. Where you're kind of having to kind of slog through the mud. There's where passion seems to really become very important, because that's when so many people kind of toss in the towel and give up. So it's just, as you think about yourself and where you are in your career, realize that it's your enthusiasm that carries you through difficult times.
This next slide here talks about Carol Dweck, and Carol Dweck, suggested that people have kind of two different mindsets, and she talks about a growth mindset, and the growth mindset is the belief that you have that you can learn, that you can change, that you might not be good at something right now, but over time you can become good at it. Now, the other mindset that some people have is a fixed mindset. And they would say, kind of Freudian, you're fixed at 6, I mean, you either have certain skills or you don't, and you're sort of set in the mold. And if you don't have that mold, if you're not going to change it much. And of course, this idea that this fixed mindset is a real bummer for people to sort of, but you can see and deepen the way people react to learning new skills, that they resist and they won't try because they have that fixed mindset. Look, I'm fixed at 6. This is not going to change. The growth mindset is this belief that abilities can be developed. And this is the combination that produces where people are willing to practice and try hard and become better at something. And we believe that is critical thing, and it's critical for people with passion to have that growth mindset. Bonnie.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. And thanks, Jack and Joe. We learned today that passion is not just an emotion. It's one of our most powerful performance tools. It's tied to one's strengths, and it really impacts leadership effectiveness. And if you are interested in experiencing our program that dives deeper into this, please visit the link on our events page as you see there. And finally, we have a short survey. The link is in the chat as you see, and when you complete this, you'll be entered into a drawing for an Amazon gift card. Maybe you can grab a book on a topic that you're passionate about. And we really appreciate you today. That concludes our webinar. Thank you, everyone.